All right, today we're going to talk about one of the most controversial figures out there right now, Tommy Robinson. He's making the argument that he has a serious warning for America, one that's based on what he says he's seen and lived through in the UK. So let's just break down what he's actually saying.
And really, everything about him boils down to this one question, doesn't it? His supporters would say, yeah, he's a truth-teller, exposing stuff the establishment wants to keep quiet. His critics, they see him as someone dangerous, just stoking the flames of division. Our job here is to just lay out the arguments he's making, plain and simple.
So we're going to get right into the main pillars of his warnings. And all of this is drawn directly from a recent, pretty intense interview he did, where he lays out his whole case through the lens of his own life story.
Okay, so for Robinson, this entire story starts at home. We're talking about his hometown of Luton, England, which is, about 30 miles or so north of London. He uses it as his ground zero, his case study for what he thinks is coming for everyone else.
And to paint a picture of the change he saw, he gives these figures. He says, look, when I was born, back in '82, Luton had just one mosque. He claims that today it has 45, and that the white English population is now a minority in the town he grew up in. Robinson argues this massive, rapid change brought on these four huge problems. He talks about deep segregation, a total failure of assimilation into British culture, and something he calls two-tier policing. Basically, the idea that authorities treated the Islamic community with kid gloves. He also makes a point of bringing up reports that the CIA at one point called Luton a major hub for terrorism in Europe.
And that leads us right to the most explosive and honestly the most disturbing part of his warning. This is the issue he's been shouting about for years, the Grooming Gang Scandal.
So what does he mean by that? Well, he describes this really methodical, predatory process. Organized groups of older men, he says, targeting young, vulnerable, non-Muslim girls. They'd befriend them, shower them with gifts, alcohol, drugs, anything to isolate them from their friends and family, which then led to horrific, widespread sexual abuse that he claims went on for decades.
1,400. That number, it comes from an official report that Robinson points to all the time. That's the estimated number of child victims in just one single small town called Rotherham. And this leads him to ask a pretty chilling question. If that happened in a town with a relatively small Muslim population, what could the real numbers be in huge cities?
Now this is the kicker for Robinson. This is his "I told you so" moment. After years of him saying he was just dismissed as a bigot, a UK government-commissioned report actually came out. And it concluded that the authorities failed to act because of institutional cowardice and a paralyzing fear of being called racist. For him, this was total vindication.
So this slide kind of breaks down that cycle of failure that he and that report describe. The argument is that even when brave people came forward and made reports, the authorities, we're talking police, social services, they just didn't investigate. And the official reason given? A fear of appearing racist because the abusers were identified as mainly Pakistani men and the victims were mainly white girls. The result, according to Robinson, was that these networks got to operate freely for year after year.
Okay, so that's the backstory in the UK. Now, how does he connect all of this to the United States? Well, he argues that what happened over there isn't some distant problem anymore. He calls it the trailer for the movie that's just getting started in America.
His whole thesis is pretty straightforward. He believes the U.S. has basically copied the U.K.'s immigration playbook, and because of that, the seed has been planted for the exact same social problems to grow over here. And he points to stuff happening right now as proof. He brings up this specific incident in New York as a prime example of the pattern he's talking about. So after a protest where homemade bombs were found, the NYC mayor puts out this statement blaming the whole thing on white supremacists. Robinson says this deliberately buried the most important detail of what actually happened.
And that leads to Robinson's big question about the whole thing. A very simple one. Who brought the bombs? He claims the official statement, and a lot of the news coverage just completely ignored the fact that the people who showed up with explosives were, in his words, ISIS-inspired individuals.
So here's his breakdown of what happened. You have the incident itself, ISIS-inspired people bringing bombs to a protest. Then you have the narrative put out by officials and media which was all about white supremacists. And the result, in his eyes, the real identity and the ideology of the people who brought weapons were completely hidden. For him, this is the exact same playbook he saw in the UK.
And all of this, it builds up to his final, very bleak warning about the path he believes the entire Western world is on. This quote really sums up his entire message, doesn't it?
He's basically positioning himself as a messenger from the future, someone who's already seen how the movie ends and is now telling Americans to get ready for what he sees as an unavoidable conflict.
Now, to back up this idea of a fundamental clash of values, he often brings up polling data like this. He claims that in the UK, 35% of Muslims believe violence is justified in the name of Islam, and that number jumps to 42% in France. Now, the way these polls are done is always up for debate, but he uses these numbers to argue that a big part of the immigrant population has values that are just not compatible with Western society.
So if you boil it all down, if you strip away everything else, his core message is this. He argues that by allowing mass immigration from cultures with what he sees as totally opposing values, and without demanding they assimilate, America is destined to go down the exact same road of social crisis and breakdown that he's already witnessed in Europe.
And that leaves us, and you, with the toughest question of all. When you're faced with a message this explosive, from a figure this controversial, the real challenge is figuring out how do we separate a genuine warning from what might just be divisive rhetoric? Where does one end and the other begin?